I never thought of myself as the kind of guy who questioned things. For nearly 11 years, Lauren and I had built a life together. Sure, the fire between us had dimmed a little over time, but I always figured what we had was unshakable, deeper than fleeting desires. But if there's one thing I've come to understand, it's that trust is delicate. Once it's broken, piecing it back together is nearly impossible. The night my world unraveled started just like any other. I was on my usual drive home from work, inching through Chicago's never-ending evening traffic. The radio droned on about the Cubs' latest game, but I wasn't really listening. Then my phone buzzed. I barely glanced at the screen, expecting some meaningless notification, until I saw the name. Lauren. But the message wasn't from her. It was a screenshot, sent by Jake, a guy from work. No explanation. Just two words. I'm sorry. Frowning, I tapped the image open. At first, my brain struggled to make sense of it. A Soto. A black sedan parked right in front of the Lexington Grand Hotel, one of the most private, high-end spots in the city. A woman stepping out. Lauren. She wasn't alone. A man, tall, dressed sharp. His hand pressed firmly against her lower back as he guided her inside. The way their bodies angled toward each other, the unspoken familiarity between them, it was obvious. My stomach dropped. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. A work meeting? A coincidence? Now, I wasn't an idiot. The way she looked at him, how effortlessly they moved together, it told me everything. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't the first time. A thought settled in my mind. Quiet. Steady. Absolute. I wasn't going home. I was going to that hotel. By the time I pulled up across the street, my heart was slamming so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands felt slick against the steering wheel as I sat there, staring at the grand entrance of the Lexington. It wasn't just a place for the rich, it was a sanctuary for secrecy. Tinted windows, warm golden lighting, a kind of luxury that whispered instead of shouted. Then I saw them. Lauren. Her dark brown hair cascading in loose waves, dressed in the navy blue dress I'd given her for our anniversary last year. Laughing at something he said. The man, Ryan, leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear as she curled her fingers around his arm, pressing just slightly into him. And then they were gone, slipping through the revolving doors together. My fingers clenched around the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. A part of me wanted to storm in, grab him by the collar, and erase that smug look off his face. Another part wanted to demand answers from Lauren, to make her say it out loud, to force her to tell me why. Instead, I just sat there, frozen. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I wasn't sure. My mind spun in circles, chasing thoughts I didn't want to entertain. Then, without fully realizing what I was doing, I pulled out my phone and typed his name, Ryan Mitchell. I'd met him once. Recently. Some corporate event Lauren dragged me to. He worked in finance, stocks, investments, the kind of guy who made more in a month than I did all year. And he was married. That's when another thought hit me. His wife. Did she know? I hesitated, thumb hovering over the search bar. And then, almost like fate itself was mocking me, the answer appeared right in front of me. A notification. Someone had tagged her in a post. Sarah Mitchell. I clicked her profile. Her most recent post was less than an hour old. A picture of a candle at dinner table, set for two. The caption read, Date night. Can't wait for you to get home, babe. A sharp, bitter taste rose in my throat. I looked at the picture, then back at the hotel entrance. She had no idea. I could have left it alone, pretended I never saw the message, driven home and let the truth eat me alive. But then I thought about that navy blue dress, the one she was wearing for him, not me. Another decision settled in my chest. I found Sarah's number, and I called. The line barely rang twice before she picked up. Hello. Her voice was soft, uncertain, like she wasn't used to answering unknown numbers. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. I hadn't even figured out what I was going to say. Sarah. The boss. Yes? Who is this? I exhaled slowly. No easy way to say it. My name is Judge Carter. Silence. Then cautiously, okay. I clenched my jaw. I think your husband is cheating on you. With my wife. The stillness on the other end was so long, I almost wondered if she'd hung up. Then, a single word. What? I gripped my phone tighter. Brian. He's at the Lexington Grand right now. Was Lauren. A shaky breath. Then a whisper. You lie. I wished I was. I saw them. Another pause. Then movement, a rustling sound, like she was getting up. Are you sure? She asked, voice tight. I have a picture. A muffled noise, like she'd just covered the phone. A sharp inhale. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. The sadness was still there, but something else had crept in, something colder. Where are you? Outside the hotel. Another beat of silence. Then, suddenly, she said, stay there. I'm Tummy. The call ended. I let out a long, shaky breath, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I had no idea what Sarah planned to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving. 20 minutes later, a silver sedan screeched to a stop next to my car. The woman who stepped out was younger than I expected, mid-30s at most, with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans, a hoodie, sneakers. But there was something about the way she carried herself, tense, on edge, like someone who'd just been sucker-punched but was still standing. Sarah. Her eyes locked onto mine immediately, and I saw it all written there. Everything I'd been feeling. Shock. Rage. Betrayal. She stormed up to my car and yanked the door open. Show me. I pulled up the picture, handed her my phone. Her hands shook as she took it. She stared at the screen, lips parting slightly, throat bobbing as she swallowed hard. 1,000 emotions flickered across her face, disbelief, fury, grease. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she lifted her gaze toward the hotel, her blue eyes darkening. They think we're idiots. I nodded. Yeah. Her fingers curled around my phone, grip tightening. Let's prove them raw. I blinked. What? She turned fully to face me, fire in her expression. You coming or not? Sarah's voice cut through the air like a challenge. And just like that, we were heading into the hotel together. The Lexington Grand was everything you'd expect from a place built for the wealthy and the discreet. Sleek marble floors gleamed under soft, ambient lighting, the ceiling stretched high, and smooth jazz drifted from hidden speakers. A concierge glanced our way, but neither of us slowed down. Sarah walked with a kind of determined fury, chin high, movement sharp. I trailed behind, unsure what the hell we were about to do but unwilling to stop her. We reached the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with flawlessly styled curls and a name tag that read Olivia, greeted us with a polite, rehearsed smile. Welcome to the Lexington Grand. How can I assist you? Sarah didn't even blink. I need Ryan Mitchell's room number. Olivia's smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry, but we're not allowed to give out that information. Sarah leaned forward, pressing her hands against the counter. Listen, I know the rules. I don't care. My husband is in this hotel, and I'm not leaving until I speak to him. Olivia hesitated, her gaze flickering toward me, searching for some kind of explanation. I kept my face blank. Whatever Sarah had planned, I wasn't about to get in the way of it. Ma'am, I really can't, Sarah exhaled sharply and pulled out her phone. Fine. I'll call him myself. She tapped Ryan's contact and pressed the call button. The phone barely had time to ring twice before he picked up. Hey, babe. Ryan's voice was casual, smooth, completely unaware of the storm about to crash down on him. Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. Where are you? A pause. Then too casual. What do you mean? Her eyes burned. You know exactly what I mean, Ryan. Silence. Then a rustling noise, like he'd just sat up in bed. We don't need to do this over the phone, he said finally. I'll be home soon. Sarah's voice sharpened. Don't bother. We're coming to you. A sharp inhale on his end. And then, just like that, the line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone slowly, her face unreadable. Then she turned to me. Let's go. I followed her to the elevators, my pulse hammering. We rode up in silence. When the doors slid open on the 10th floor, the hallway stretched before us, polished wooden doors lined up like secrets waiting to be uncovered. But I only cared about one. Room 10 to 12. Sarah knocked. Part. No answer. She knocked again, this time with more force. Footsteps. Then the door cracked open. Lauren stood there, wrapped in a hotel robe, damp hair clinging to her skin, lips still slightly swollen from kissing someone who wasn't me. The second she saw me, her entire body froze. Joss? Her voice was barely above a whisper. My whole body locked up. And then Ryan stepped into view behind her. Shirtless. Hair messy. His face shifted from confusion to pure, unfiltered panic. His eyes darted from me to Sarah, then back again. What the hell is this? He muttered. Sarah didn't wait. She pushed past Lauren like she had every right to be there. I followed, shutting the door hard behind us. The room smelled of perfume and sweat. And the worst part? I recognized Lauren's scent lingering in the air. Lauren took a small step toward me. Josh, I don't. My voice came out colder than I expected. Sarah folded her arms, turning to Ryan. Go on. Ryan sighed, running a hand down his face like we were inconveniencing him. Come on, Sarah. Does it really matter? Her jaw tightened. Of course it matters. You're my husband. Lauren finally spoke, her voice quiet. This isn't how we wanted you to find out. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Oh, really? How are we supposed to find out? Lauren, over breakfast? Honey, by the way, I've been sleeping with someone else. Pass the orange juice. She winced. You don't understand. My hands clenched into fists. Boom. I understand perfectly. My voice shook, but not with sadness. With rage. I understand that you've been lying to me for God knows how long. That I've been living next to a stranger. Ryan scoffed, rubbing his temples. Mutt, I know this is tough for you guys, but let's be real. Our marriages weren't exactly exciting before this. Sarah's mouth fell open. Are you actually trying to justify this? Lauren's arms folded across her chest. Josh, we weren't happy. I stared at her. She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. I wasn't happy. Something inside me cracked. Sarah let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So that's it. You weren't happy, so you just threw away your marriage. Ryan groaned dramatically. Would it have changed anything? I took a step toward him before I even realized I'd moved. Ryan smirked, like he knew I wouldn't do anything. My fists tightened. Josh, Sarah's voice cut through the tension, grounding me before I made a decision I'd regret. I exhaled sharply. Sarah turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine. Come on, Josh. We're done here. I didn't hesitate. We walked out, leaving them in the wreckage of their own choices. I'd always assumed the worst part of betrayal would be the rage. The burning, gut-wrenching anger of being lied to, of being tossed aside like something disposable. But I was wrong. The worst part was the silence that followed. Sarah and I left the Lexington Grand without another word. No slammed doors. No shouting. Just the weight of reality settling in as we walked away. And yet, the quiet was unbearable. I drove aimlessly through Chicago, the city's dim lights blurring past, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might break. I had nowhere to go. Pan? The place Lauren and I had built together? It felt ruined. Like a crime scene, tainted by her betrayal. A hotel? A friend's couch? None of it felt right. Instead, I found myself parked outside a small 24-hour diner on the edge of the city. The neon lights buzzed faintly in the darkness. Through the window, I could see the inside was mostly empty, a lone trucker hunched over a plate of eggs, a waitress popping her gum behind the counter. And then, in a booth near the window, Sarah. She looked up when I walked in, her blue eyes red-rimmed but sharp. Her fingers wrapped tightly around a coffee cup, but it didn't look like she'd taken a sip. I hesitated. Then, without a word, I slid into the seat across from her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sarah let out a breathless, bitter laugh. I was hoping you'd show up. I huffed out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. Yeah. She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Didn't feel like going home either? Nope. She exhaled slowly, leaning back against the seat. I thought I'd be more angry. I stared down at my hands. Me too. And it was the truth. I thought I'd be furious. I imagined breaking things, yelling at Lauren, demanding explanations she'd never really give. But sitting there, under the diner's dim glow, all I felt was done. Sarah studied me, her voice softer this time. How long do you think it's been going on? My jaw tightened. A while. She nodded, like she'd already known. Yeah, I think so too. Silence settled between us, save for the quiet strumming of some old rock song playing overhead. It should have felt heavy, unbearable, but it didn't. It was just there. Then, without thinking, I said, I called you because I thought you deserved to know. Sarah let out a small, tired smile. Well, I appreciate that. Then she raised an eyebrow, something unreadable in her gaze. Though I have to say, you were braver than I was. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated before exhaling slowly. I found messages. Months ago. Nothing obvious, just little things. Late-night calls that didn't add up. Texts that were too familiar. She paused, tapping her fingers lightly against her coffee cup. I convinced myself I was imagining it. I studied her, a weight settling in my chest. Why didn't you confront him? She swallowed hard, looking down. Because I wasn't ready to lose. The words hit like a gut punch. Because I understood exactly what she meant. Deep down, I had known too. The distance. The unread messages. The way Lauren started keeping her phone close, like it held classified information. And yet, I ignored it. because admitting it would have meant accepting that my marriage had already fallen apart. But now? Now, there was no denying it. By the time we left the diner, the sky had started shifting, the first hints of sunrise casting soft gold over the city. We stood outside for a moment, the crisp morning air biting against the remnants of a night. Sarah shoved her hands into her jacket pockets. I should probably head home. I nodded. Yeah, me too. But neither of us moved. Instead, I found myself watching her, the way the light caught the edges of her blonde hair, the exhaustion that lingered in her features but didn't dull her fire. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. What? I hesitated. Then, before I could second-guess it, I asked, do you want to take a walk? She blinked. Now. I shrugged. I don't really want to go home yet. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, she murmured. Unlike that. So we walked. Through streets still waking up, past bakeries setting out fresh bread, past joggers who had no idea our worlds had just imploded. At some point, we ended up near the river, where a small park sat tucked between the buildings. Cobblestone paths, wrought iron benches, the kind of place meant for quiet moments. I gestured toward one. Sit. Sarah nodded, sinking onto the bench beside me. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, staring out at the water. Then, softly, she said, It's weird. I turned to her. What is? She hesitated. I don't feel as broken as I did yesterday. I swallowed, glancing down at my hands. Me neither. And that was the truth. I still felt raw. Still felt betrayed. But sitting there, next to Sarah, I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. She turned to me then, her blue eyes searching mine. What now? I let out a slow breath. I don't know. She gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, me neither. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever it was, I wasn't facing it alone. The next few weeks blurred together. At first, Sarah and I kept running into each other for practical reasons, divorce logistics, splitting assets, legal paperwork, venting about our exes. But then, somewhere along the way, it became more than that. Late-night calls that stretched until morning. Coffee runs that lasted for hours. Stolen moments where, for just a little while, neither of us felt the weight of everything we'd lost. One night, after a long day of sorting through paperwork, we ended up at a small Italian restaurant in Wicker Park. As soon as we sat down, Sarah leaned back in her chair and smirked. This isn't a date. I smirked back. Definitely not. But an hour later, as she laughed, really laughed, for the first time since that night at the hotel, something shifted. I wanted to be the reason she laughed like that again. And judging by the way she looked at me, she felt it too. We didn't talk about it. Not yet. But when I walked her to her car that night, she hesitated before opening the door, her teeth sinking into her bottom lip. Then, softly, she asked, What are we doing, Josh? I could have lied. I could have told her we were just friends, two people getting through the same storm. But that wasn't the truth. So instead, I stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. Her breast caught. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't thinking about Lauren. I was thinking about Sarah. That night, something changed. We didn't say it out loud, but we both felt it. The shift. The pull. The realization that whatever was happening between us, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was something else. Something dangerous. Something real. A week later, we found ourselves at a charity gala. The kind of event we normally would have skipped, but we both knew Lauren and Ryan would be there. It wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't even about making a statement. It was about control. About walking into that room and knowing, for the first time, we weren't the ones who had been left behind. Sarah was stunning that night. She wore a deep green dress, simple but elegant, the kind that made my throat go dry. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and for the first time, I wondered if Ryan had ever really seen her. If he had ever looked at her the way I was looking at her now. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. What? I cleared my throat, shaking my head. Nothing. She smirked, but in her eyes, there was something else, something unsure, something hesitant. We stepped into the ballroom together, the low hum of conversation filling the space, the scent of expensive perfume and champagne lingering in the air. And then, I felt it. Their eyes. Across the room, Lauren and Ryan stood by the bar, engaged in small talk with another couple, pretending everything was normal. Pretending they hadn't shattered two lives. But when Lauren's gaze landed on us, something in her expression shifted. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes flicking between me and Sarah, processing what she was seeing. Good. Let her wonder. I leaned in closer to Sarah, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. Besias. She didn't react right away, just took a slow sip of her champagne, letting the bubbles linger on her lips. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she whispered, "Let them." And that's when Ryan turned. For the first time since that night at the hotel, his eyes locked onto mine. And in that split second, I sighed, a flicker of something almost resembling regret. Not for what he did, not because he cared about Sarah, but because, for the first time, he realized what he had lost. Because the woman standing beside me, the one he discarded, wasn't broken. She was stronger than ever. He muttered something under his breath to Lauren, and I saw her body tense. Then, as if on cue, they started walking toward us. Sarah's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass. I could feel the question hovering between us. Do we leave? Do we stand our ground? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to her, catching the way her lips parted slightly, the small hitch in her breath. And then, I did the only thing that felt right. I kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't logical. It just was. The second my lips met hers, everything else disappeared. The hum of conversation. The clinking of glasses. The fact that our exes were closing in. Gone. Sarah inhaled sharply against my mouth, startled, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she softened, melting into me, her hand resting lightly against my chest, her body pressing just enough to make my pulse spike. Her lips were warm. Soft. Hesitant at first, but then something shifted. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the months of pent-up anger and heartbreak. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something real. She let out a quiet sound against my lips, something between a sigh and a moan, and it sent heat flooding through me. My fingers curled around her waist, pulling her in, deepening the kiss just enough to make my heartbeat slam against my ribs. God, I hadn't felt like this in years. This wasn't just want. It wasn't just desire. It was alive. And then, just as suddenly, Sarah pulled back. Her breath came fast, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to panic. Josh, she whispered, voice unsteady. What are we doing? I swallowed hard, my own pulse thundering in my ears. I could have brushed it off, played it cool, pretended it was just a performance, a way to get under their skin. But I couldn't, because it wasn't. So instead, I met her gaze and said the only thing I could. I don't know. And the worst part? I didn't regret it. Not even a little. If you told me 6 months ago that I'd be here, waking up beside Sarah, watching sunlight spill through the curtains, tracing lazy circles along her bare shoulder, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, I thought my life was over. Now, I knew better. It hadn't ended. It had just started. Sarah stirred beside me, mumbling something incoherent, her face half buried in the pillow. I smirked, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Morning, sunshine, I murmured. She cracked one eye open. Too early for flirting. I chuckled. Too late for regrets? She studied me for a second. Then, softer, she said, I don't regret a damn thing. Neither did I. Later that day, we left the city. Sarah glanced over at me, curiosity flickering in her eyes as I steered the car down a long, winding road. Where are we going? I smirked, keeping one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on her thigh. It's a surprise. She narrowed her eyes. You know I hate surprises. You like this one. 30 minutes later, I pulled into a gravel driveway, stopping in front of a house tucked away in the countryside. Nothing extravagant, just a small, beautiful place with a wraparound porch, a stone chimney, and enough space for 2 people to build something real. Sarah stared, lips parted. Das? I stepped out, walked around to her side, and pressed a small silver key into her palm. Her breath hitched. Is this? I nodded, my chest tightening. Our new home? She blinked up at me, stunned. You bought this. For us. I swallowed, my heart hammering. I don't think we're ready for this, Sarah. I paused. Then, firmer. I know we are. She just looked at me, something warm and unguarded shining in her gaze. Then, suddenly, she laughed. A real, unrestrained laugh, the kind that made my stomach flip. And before I could react, she threw her arms around my neck and kissed me. That evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, 2 glasses of wine resting between us. Sarah leaned into me, her fingers laced through mine. I never thought betrayal would lead me to something this beautiful. I turned, pressing a slow kiss to her temple. Me neither. And as we sat there, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in us, I realized something. Lauren and Ryan thought they had broken us. But instead, They brought us together. And I wouldn't change a damn thing. Not for the world.